March the 6th, 1944, 26,000 feet above Münsterland, Germany. The air was thin and bitterly cold as Oberleutnant Klaus Weber banked his Focke-Wulf FW-190A-8 through scattered clouds, confident in the superior performance of his fighter against the lumbering American juggernaut he had just spotted below. In mere minutes, he would add another victory to his tally of 7 confirmed kills. What Weber couldn't possibly know was that his certainty about air combat superiority was about to be shattered at terminal velocity. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the account of how the devastating dive capabilities of the P-47 Thunderbolt, America's heaviest single-engine fighter of World War II, created not just tactical advantage, but psychological warfare against the Luftwaffe, fundamentally altering the aerial battlefield of Europe through a capability the Germans never anticipated. Captain James Goodson, commanding officer of the 336th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group, squinted through his canopy at the German formation 2,000 feet below. The bulky P-47 Thunderbolt he piloted had been nicknamed the Jug by its pilots, partly for its jug-like appearance, partly short for Juggernaut. At 36,000 pounds fully loaded, it was indeed a behemoth compared to the nimble Fu-190s and Bf-109s it faced in combat. Blue leader to blue flight, bandits 4 o'clock low, looks like 190s, count 8. No, 10. Escorting what appears to be Ju-88s, Goodson reported, his breath fogging his oxygen mask in the -40-degree cold of high altitude. Blue 2 copies, responded Lieutenant Robert Johnson, his wingman. Those 190s look like they haven't spotted us yet. Blue 3 here, perfect bounce position. They're fat, dumb, and happy down there, added Lieutenant Ralph Hofer, the squadron's most aggressive pilot with already 9 confirmed kills to his credit. The 4th Fighter Group, originally formed from American volunteers in the Royal Air Force Eagle squadrons, had recently transitioned from the British Spitfire to the American P-47. The change had not been entirely welcome. The Thunderbolt was nearly twice the weight of a Spitfire, less maneuverable, and many pilots initially viewed it as a step backward. But what these pilots were discovering, and what the Luftwaffe had yet to learn, was that this massive aircraft possessed one devastating advantage. All right, Blue Flight, we'll take these boys. Remember your energy, use the dive. Standard attack pattern. I'll take the leader, Goodson ordered. Weapons hot. Let's go get 'em. 3 miles away and 2,000 feet below, Oberleutnant Weber led his staffel of FW-190s in a loose combat formation. Their mission was straightforward: escort the Ju-88 bombers to their target, a railway junction near Hamm, then return to base. Intelligence had reported American fighter activity had been minimal in this sector over the past 48 hours. Falke Gruppe, maintain position, target area in approximately 12 minutes, Weber instructed his pilots. Most were young replacements with fewer than 50 combat hours. Weber himself, at 24, was practically a veteran with over 300 combat sorties. Unteroffizier Hans Müller, flying Weber's wing, was on only his 7th combat mission. Herr Oberleutnant, the weather report mentioned clear skies, but those clouds concern me. Weber chuckled. Müller, you worry too much. Those scattered cumulus are perfect. Good cover if we need it, but visibility remains excellent. Besides, our 190s can outclimb and outmaneuver anything the Americans throw at us. This was the standard doctrine taught to all Luftwaffe pilots. The Focke-Wulf 190, particularly the A8 variant they flew, was arguably the best fighter in the European theatre in a turning fight below 20,000 feet. Its BMW 801D2 radial engine produced 700 horsepower, giving it excellent acceleration and climb rate. Luftwaffe pilots were trained to exploit these advantages, to turn tightly, to climb when threatened, to use vertical maneuvers to escape. What they weren't prepared for was an enemy that could dive faster than any aircraft they had ever encountered. Oberleutnant Weber was a product of this doctrine. He had trained at the fighter school at Bad Aibling in 1941, where instructors emphasized the FW-190's strengths and how to maximize them in combat. The FW-190 could roll at 360 degrees per second, an incredible rate that allowed for rapid changes in direction. Pilots were taught to use this roll rate to initiate tight turns, to break enemy tracking, to position for shots. "Remember your training," Weber told his pilots. "If we encounter enemy fighters, we maintain formation integrity until engagement, then break into rotor pairs, use our roll rate advantage, force them into a turning fight. The P-47s are large and unwieldy. They cannot match our maneuverability." Indeed, what Weber didn't understand, what the entire Luftwaffe fighter command hadn't fully grasped, was that the Americans had developed a completely different combat doctrine based on the P-47's unique capabilities. The story of this tactical disconnect began 2 years earlier at Republic Aviation's factory in Farmingdale, Long Island. There, engineer Alexander Kartveli had designed the P-47 around the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, the most powerful aircraft engine in production, capable of generating up to 800 horsepower. To handle this enormous power plant, Kartveli had created an airframe of unprecedented strength and size. When test pilot Lowry Brabham first put the prototype XP-47B through high-speed dives in 1941, he discovered something remarkable. The aircraft's weight and power, combined with its robust construction, allowed it to achieve dive speeds approaching 550 miles per hour, significantly faster than any fighter then in existence. At such velocities, the controls remained responsive, without the lock-up or buffeting that plagued lighter aircraft. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group and one of the first to receive the P-47 in England, immediately recognized the tactical potential. "Gentlemen, forget everything you know about dogfighting," he told his pilots in early 1943. "This aircraft is not a ballerina, it's a sledgehammer. We dive, we hit, we climb away, we use our weight and power as weapons." The 56th Fighter Group developed what became known as the dive-zoom-dive tactic. P-47s would orbit at high altitude, often above 30,000 feet, spot enemy aircraft below, dive at tremendous speed to make a single firing pass, then zoom, climb back to altitude using the energy from the dive. The tactic was revolutionary, transforming a disadvantage, the P-47's weight, into its greatest strength. Back above Münsterland, Captain Goodson's flight of 4 P-47s tipped over into a near-vertical dive toward Weber's unsuspecting formation. The Thunderbolts accelerated with astonishing rapidity, their airspeed indicators quickly climbing past 400, then 450, then 500 miles per hour. "Jesus Christ," muttered Lieutenant Hofer as the massive G-forces pushed him back in his seat. "My grandmother could hit these guys from this setup." The 4 P-47s screamed downward, their R2800 engines producing a distinctive sound that Luftwaffe pilots had learned to fear, a deep, throaty roar that announced imminent danger, but usually too late to react effectively. Weber, flying at 24,000 feet, heard nothing over the noise of his own BMW engine. His first indication of trouble came when Müller's voice crackled over the radio with sudden alarm. "Achtung! Achtung! Thunderbolts! High! Diving!" Weber instinctively looked up and felt his stomach clench at the sight of 4 massive American fighters plummeting toward his formation like hawks stooping on pigeons. They were moving so fast that contrails formed briefly off their wingtips, despite the relatively dry air. "Brake right! Brake right!" Weber shouted, rolling his 190 and pulling hard, expecting his superior maneuverability to save him. It was precisely what Goodson had anticipated. As Weber broke, Goodson adjusted his dive angle slightly, allowing the tremendous momentum of the P-47 to keep him aligned with the turning German fighter. The Thunderbolts' 8 50 caliber machine guns, each capable of firing 800 rounds per minute, were already charged and ready. Goodson tracked the Focke-Wulf through his gun sight, factored in the extreme closing speed, and pressed the trigger. A storm of heavy machine gun fire erupted from the P-47's wings. Half-inch projectiles, designed to penetrate armor, tore through the FW-190's fuselage and cockpit. Weber never had time to register what had happened. His aircraft erupted into flames and plummeted earthward. Muller, witnessing his leader's demise, did what his training dictated. He used the FW-190's exceptional roll rate to reverse direction and tried to climb to engage the Americans. It was the worst possible decision. Lieutenant Johnson, diving at nearly 540 Meter, simply adjusted his course slightly and caught the climbing 190 in a devastating deflection shot. Muller's right wing separated from his aircraft, sending it into an unrecoverable spiral. The remaining German pilots scattered in panic, abandoning their bomber charges. They had been caught completely unprepared for the Americans' diving attack. Their training had emphasized the FW-190's superiority in a turning fight. They had been taught that American fighters, particularly the heavy P-47, could be outmaneuvered. Nobody had told them that the P-47 could dive at speeds approaching 550 mph while maintaining full control authority, speeds at which their own aircraft would experience severe control problems or even structural failure. "Blue Flight, pull up, conserve your energy," Goodson ordered as they flashed through the German formation. The 4 P-47s, using their tremendous dive speed, converted their kinetic energy into altitude, zooming back up thousands of feet before the surviving German pilots could even begin to react. 5 miles away, Hauptmann Ernst Schröder watched the encounter through his binoculars from the cockpit of his Bf-109 G6. As Staffelkapitan of 3 JG-26, Schröder had over 800 combat hours and 29 confirmed victories. He considered himself an expert on Allied fighter tactics and capabilities. "That's impossible," he muttered to himself. "No fighter can dive that fast and still fight effectively." Yet he had just witnessed 4 P-47s do exactly that. The Americans had dived through the German formation at speeds his own Bf-109 could never achieve without risking structural failure. Scored at least 2 kills in a single pass, then climbed away before an effective response could be mounted. As Goodson's flight regained altitude, they set up for another attack run. The Ju-88 bombers, now without effective escort, were continuing toward their target. "Blue leader to Blue Flight, those 88s are sitting ducks now. Same tactic. I'll take the lead bomber. Blue 2, take left flanker. Blue 3 and 4, take your pick of the remainder." "Roger that," Johnson replied, already anticipating his next attack. "These boys have no idea what's about to hit them." The experiences of pilots like Weber and Müller were being repeated across the European theater as the Luftwaffe struggled to adapt to the P-47's unexpected capabilities. The psychological impact was as significant as the tactical advantage. German pilots began to look up more often, scanning the high altitudes where Thunderbolts might be orbiting. When engaged in combat with other Allied fighters, they became increasingly distracted by the possibility of P-47s diving on them from above. This psychological warfare extended beyond the cockpit. At Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin, intelligence officers were baffled by combat reports describing American fighters achieving impossible speeds in dives. Many of these reports were dismissed as exaggerations from inexperienced pilots or attempts to explain away defeats. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, Geschwaderkommodore of JG-54 and a respected fighter tactician, compiled a detailed analysis of engagements with P-47s in late 1943. His report, sent to General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, warned that the Thunderbolt possessed unprecedented diving capabilities that render our current tactical doctrine ineffective when the Americans hold the altitude advantage. Galland, himself an ace with 104 confirmed victories, initially dismissed Trautloft's concerns. "No aircraft can maintain control at such speeds," he reportedly replied. "Physics simply doesn't allow it." But as combat losses mounted and more reports filtered in, even Galland had to acknowledge the threat. In January 1944, he issued a tactical directive to all Jagdgeschwader units. When encountering P-47 Thunderbolts, maintain altitude advantage at all costs. Do not allow the Americans to position themselves above you. If they achieve superior altitude, do not attempt to outmaneuver their diving attacks. Instead, dive away at maximum permissible speed and distance yourself from the engagement area. It was, in effect, an admission that the Luftwaffe had no effective counter to the P-47's diving tactics. The directive represented a significant psychological victory for the Americans. German pilots were being instructed to flee rather than fight when faced with Thunderbolts in an advantageous position. Back over Münsterland, Schroeder watched as Goodson's flight set up for their attack on the unprotected Ju-88s. He keyed his radio. "Adler Gruppe, this is Adler 1. Form on me immediately. We must gain altitude before engaging the P-47s. I repeat, altitude is essential." Schroeder's wingman, Lieutenant Karl Wagner, responded with confusion. "Herr Hauptmann, we can catch them if we intercept now. They are focusing on the bombers." "Negative, Wagner," Schroeder snapped. "Those Thunderbolts will destroy us if we approach without altitude advantage. We climb first, then engage on our terms." Wagner was perplexed. Like most Luftwaffe pilots, he had been indoctrinated with the superiority of German fighter aircraft and tactics. The idea of ceding an engagement area to ensure tactical advantage ran counter to his aggressive training. But Schroeder was a veteran whose judgment he trusted. "As you command, Herr Hauptmann," Wagner replied reluctantly. Schroeder led his Staffel in a climbing turn, hoping to position his fighters above the Americans before they completed their attack on the bombers. He knew it was probably futile. The Thunderbolts would finish their attack run and be gone before his Bf-109s could reach an advantageous position, but it was the only tactically sound option available. Below, the Ju-88 bomber crews realized their peril. Without fighter escort, they were defenseless against the diving Thunderbolts. The bomber formation tightened, gunners swiveling their weapons skyward, though they knew their 7.92-meter machine guns had little chance against the heavily armored American fighters. Oberfeldwebel Dieter Schmidt, bomb aimer in the lead Ju-88, watched through his glazed nose position as the first P-47 began its dive. The American fighter grew rapidly larger in his field of vision, its 8 wing-mounted machine guns spitting fire. "Incoming fighter! Take evasive action!" Schmidt shouted into his intercom. Hauptmann Wilhelm Keller, the aircraft's pilot, pushed the control column forward, sending the bomber into a shallow dive while applying left rudder to throw off the Americans' aim. The maneuver, though executed perfectly, was insufficient against the P-47's overwhelming speed advantage. Captain Goodson, diving at over 500 mph, had so much excess energy that he easily adjusted his flight path to match the bomber's evasive movement. His 8 50-caliber guns raked the Ju-88 from nose to tail, shredding control surfaces and igniting one engine. The bomber fell away, trailing smoke and flame. The entire attack lasted less than 10 seconds. 4 Ju-88s were destroyed, and 3 more badly damaged. The surviving bombers jettisoned their payloads and fled eastward, their mission a complete failure. The 4 Thunderbolts, having expended less than half their ammunition and fuel, climbed back to altitude and resumed their patrol. Schroeder, watching from a distance as his altitude advantage slowly built, clenched his jaw in frustration. Adlergruppe, disengage, return to base. We cannot match their position. Wagner was incredulous. Herr Hauptmann, we cannot simply abandon. We have already lost this engagement. Wagner, Schroeder interrupted. The only question is whether we lose aircraft and pilots as well. We return to base. Now. The psychological impact of such encounters extended beyond tactical considerations. For Luftwaffe pilots trained to believe in their technical and tactical superiority, the inability to effectively counter the P-47's diving attacks created a crisis of confidence. The knowledge that American fighters could strike from above with near impunity, then escape before an effective response could be mounted, fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of aerial combat over Europe. This psychological warfare was not lost on Allied commanders. General William Kepner, commanding the 8th Fighter Command, instructed his group leaders to maintain maximum altitude whenever possible. The mere presence of P-47s orbiting at 30,000 feet forces the enemy to look up rather than focus on their primary mission. Even when we do not attack, we affect the enemy's operations through the threat we represent. Major Robert Landry, intelligence officer for the 56th Fighter Group, collected statements from captured Luftwaffe pilots throughout 1943 and early 1944. His report to 8th Air Force Headquarters in February 1944 highlighted the psychological dimension. German pilots expressed particular concern regarding the P-47's diving capability. Several POWs have stated that the standing order when P-47s are sighted above is to immediately disengage and separate. This represents a significant departure from previous Luftwaffe tactics and suggests a psychological advantage has been achieved beyond the purely tactical benefits. Oberst Werner Mulders had developed the Finger Four formation and tactical doctrine that formed the backbone of Luftwaffe fighter operations. Before his death in 1941, he had emphasized flexibility, aggression, and the exploitation of German aircraft performance advantages. By 1944, his carefully crafted tactical system was being undone by American fighters that could dictate the terms of engagement through superior altitude and diving speed. For pilots like Unteroffizier Peter Schmitz, a relatively new replacement in JG-26, who had barely survived his encounter with diving Thunderbolts the previous week, the psychological impact manifested as a constant state of anxiety during missions. We were patrolling near Osnabrück when Staffelkapitän Richter called out Thunderbolts high at our 10 o'clock, Schmitz later recounted to his intelligence officer. Immediately, every pilot in the formation began looking up rather than maintaining proper situational awareness. We were so focused on the threat from above that we nearly flew into a formation of Spitfires approaching from our level. The Americans have made us fear our own airspace. Back at the 4th Fighter Group's base at Debden, Captain Goodson led his flight through the landing pattern. All 4 P-47s returned without so much as a scratch. As ground crews swarmed the aircraft to refuel and rearm them, the pilots gathered for debriefing. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley, the group commander, met them in the intelligence office. A hard-charging leader with little patience for formality, Blakesley got straight to the point. Results? 6 confirmed, 2 probables, Goodson reported. 4 190s and 2 Ju-88s confirmed destroyed. The remaining bombers aborted their mission. Blakesley nodded approvingly. Damage to our aircraft? None, sir. They never laid a glove on us. Standard dive attack, exactly as briefed. Intelligence Officer Captain William Ash asked, "Any new observations about enemy tactics or capabilities?" Lieutenant Johnson removed his flight cap and ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "They still don't get it, sir. They tried to turn with us during our dive, as if they were facing Spitfires. By the time they realized their mistake, they were already going down." Hofer chimed in. 1190 tried to climb away. At the speed we were diving, it was like he was standing still. Ash made notes in his log. "That's consistent with what we're seeing across all groups. The Germans haven't adapted their tactics to counter our dive capability. Their training still emphasizes turning fights and climbing spirals, exactly the situations where our dive-zoom-dive tactic is most effective." Blakesley grunted. "Let's hope they keep not getting it. The minute they figure out how to counter our diving attacks is the minute our loss rates go up. But the Luftwaffe never did get it completely, not in time to change the outcome of the air war." By the time General Galland and his staff fully appreciated the tactical problem posed by the P-47's diving capability, the Luftwaffe lacked the resources, the fuel, and the trained pilots to develop and implement effective countermeasures. The reasons for this failure were numerous. First, the Luftwaffe's fighter pilot training program had been severely curtailed due to fuel shortages. New pilots received less than 150 hours of flight training before being sent to combat units. Barely enough time to master basic aircraft handling, let alone complex tactical concepts. Second, the Luftwaffe's fighter force was increasingly forced into a defensive posture, reacting to Allied initiatives rather than setting the terms of engagement, with Allied fighters establishing air superiority over most of Western Europe by mid-1944. German pilots had few opportunities to experiment with new tactics in actual combat conditions. Third, and perhaps most significantly, the Luftwaffe's leadership remained wedded to existing tactical doctrines, despite mounting evidence of their ineffectiveness against new American tactics. This institutional inertia, common in military organizations, was exacerbated by the increasingly desperate strategic situation facing Germany on all fronts. General Galland later reflected on this tactical failure in his post-war memoirs. "We were slow to recognize the full implications of the Americans' high-altitude, high-speed tactics. Our aircraft, particularly the Bf-109, were designed for a different style of air combat. By the time we fully understood the problem, we lacked the industrial capacity to develop an adequate response." What made the P-47's diving capability so devastating was not merely its tactical advantage, but its psychological impact. German pilots, knowing they could be struck from above at any moment by an enemy they could neither outrun nor outmaneuver, experienced a fundamental shift in their approach to air combat. From the aggressive, confident tactics that had served them well in earlier phases of the war, they adopted an increasingly defensive, survival-oriented mindset. This psychological dimension extended to the highest levels of Luftwaffe command. As General der Flieger Karl Koller noted in a memorandum to Field Marshal Hermann Göring in March 1944, "Our pilots report increasing difficulty in closing with American formations due to the extreme diving speeds of their P-47 and P-51 fighters. This capability allows the Americans to dictate when and where engagements occur, forcing our fighters into reactive rather than proactive postures." The technical foundations of the P-47's diving prowess were relatively straightforward. Its enormous weight, nearly twice that of a Bf-109, combined with the powerful R-2800 engine, created tremendous momentum in a dive. The robust airframe, designed to handle the stresses of the massive power plant, could withstand the forces generated by high-speed dives without the control surface buffeting or compression that plagued lighter fighters. Republic Aviation's chief test pilot, Carl Bellinger, had discovered this capability during early flight testing in 1942. We were conducting high-speed trials when I put the aircraft into a steeper dive than previously attempted, he noted in his test report. The airspeed indicator quickly passed 500 mph, yet the controls remained responsive, and the airframe showed no signs of stress. This characteristic alone may prove tactically significant. Significant indeed. By the summer of 1944, 8th Air Force fighter groups equipped with the P-47 had refined their diving tactics to deadly effectiveness. The 56th Fighter Group under Colonel Hub Zemke became particularly adept, developing what became known as the Zemke Fan, a tactical formation that maximized the P-47's diving capability by spreading fighters across a wide front at high altitude, allowing them to cover a large area while maintaining their altitude advantage. For Luftwaffe pilots like Hauptmann Schröder, the psychological toll mounted with each encounter. After landing from the aborted intercept over Münsterland, he faced difficult questions from his commanding officer. "Explain to me, Schröder, why you disengaged without firing a single shot," demanded Major Hans Korte, the Gruppenkommandeur of the 2nd JG-26. Schröder stood at attention, fatigue etched on his face. "Herr Major, the Americans held an altitude advantage of at least 6,000 meters. Their diving speed would have made effective interception impossible. Any attempt would have resulted in the loss of aircraft and pilots with no corresponding damage to the enemy." Korte's expression darkened. "So you watched as our bombers were destroyed?" "I made a tactical decision based on the reality of the situation," Schröder replied, his voice tight. "Had we attempted to engage, we would now be reporting the loss of pilots rather than merely the failure of the mission." Korte turned away, his frustration evident. "You are probably correct, Schröder, and that is what I find most disturbing. This exchange, representative of many occurring throughout the Luftwaffe in 1944, illustrated the deeper impact of the P-47's capabilities. German fighter commanders found themselves increasingly forced to choose between tactically sound decisions that preserved their forces and the aggressive doctrine that had previously defined Luftwaffe fighter operations. The psychological weight of this dilemma, knowing that the correct tactical choice often meant allowing Allied bombers to reach their targets unmolested, created immense stress throughout the chain of command. By April 1944, the Luftwaffe had begun to develop countermeasures, though none proved fully effective. The most common adaptation was an emphasis on low-altitude operations, where the P-47's weight became a disadvantage rather than an asset. German fighters would deliberately stay below 10 feet when possible, making it difficult for the Thunderbolts to exploit their diving capability without risking unrecoverable dives into the ground. Another approach involved greater use of vertical evasive maneuvers when P-47s were sighted above. Rather than attempting to outmaneuver the diving Americans, a futile endeavor given the speed differential, German pilots were instructed to dive away at their maximum permissible speed, using cloud cover when available, then initiate a climbing turn back into the fight once the P-47s had expended their energy advantage. These adaptations, while tactically sound, carried significant operational costs. Low-altitude operations increased fuel consumption and reduced the Luftwaffe's ability to effectively intercept Allied bomber formations flying at medium to high altitudes. Evasive tactics ceded initiative to the Americans and limited opportunities for German pilots to score victories. Moreover, by mid-1944, the arrival of the P-51 Mustang in significant numbers added a new dimension to the Luftwaffe's problems. While the P-47 excelled in the diving attack role, the Mustang combined good diving characteristics with superior range and low-altitude performance. German pilots now faced American fighters that could both dive effectively from altitude and pursue them at low level. For pilots like Lieutenant Wagner, the psychological impact was profound. "Before we at least understood the rules of the engagement," he wrote in a letter home in May 1944, "we knew our aircraft's strengths and weaknesses, and those of our opponents. Now it seems the Americans can do everything we can do, and several things we cannot. The sky no longer feels like a place where skill and courage guarantee survival." Captain Goodson and his fellow P-47 pilots continued to exploit their aircraft's diving capability throughout 1944. Even after the 4th Fighter Group transitioned to P-51 Mustangs in March, the lessons learned in the Thunderbolt shaped their tactical approach. The psychological advantage gained through the diving attack, the ability to strike with near impunity and withdraw before effective counterattack, remained central to American fighter doctrine. By the war's end, the P-47 Thunderbolt had proven itself one of the most effective fighter bombers of the conflict. Its incredible diving speed, that capability the Luftwaffe never fully countered, was just one aspect of an aircraft that combined durability, firepower, and versatility in a unique package. But it was the psychological dimension of that diving capability that perhaps left the most lasting impact on the air war over Europe. As General Galland reflected in a post-war interview, the Americans changed the nature of air combat with their high-altitude, high-speed tactics. Our pilots, trained in the traditions of Mulders and Richthofen, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to engage on our terms. The psychological effect was as damaging as the physical losses we sustained. For Oberleutnant Weber, caught by surprise in that fateful dive attack over Münsterland, the lesson came too late. Like many Luftwaffe pilots, he'd been trained to believe in the technical and tactical superiority of German fighter aircraft. The reality that an American fighter weighing over 8 tons could dive at speeds approaching 550 mph while maintaining full control authority simply did not fit within his conceptual framework of air combat. In the skies over Europe in 1944, such disconnects between expectation and reality proved fatal. The P-47's diving capability represented more than just a tactical advantage. It constituted a fundamental challenge to the Luftwaffe's understanding of aerial warfare, a challenge they never fully overcame. By the time the last Thunderbolts returned to American soil after the war's end, they had helped secure the Allied victory through both their combat effectiveness and the psychological warfare they waged against an enemy that never fully understood what they were facing. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.